Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Kathy Barnette Show. I'm going to just get right into it. We have seen, I think Saturday has changed a lot of the calculus for a lot of people, not just for those of us here in the United States, but abroad as well. And I have today a very interesting guest. I follow him religiously, if I can use that word, to find out what is going on, primarily when I'm thinking about China, what is happening in China and their relationships with other leaders across the world. Today, I'm going to be talking to Mr. Gordan Chang. Mr. Chang, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yes, let me tell you guys a little bit about Gordan. Author, lawyer, journalist. You've done a lot, sir. But in addition, you graduated from Cornell Law School, lived in mainland China and in Hong Kong for close to 2 decades. You've given briefings at the National Intelligence Council, the CIA, the U.S. State Department, the U.S. Department of Defense, and you've testified before the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. And so the questions I was initially going to ask you prior to the attempted assassination of President Donald Trump on this past Saturday was really going to, you tweet a lot. I read your tweets. And in those tweets, you spend a lot of time calling on us to pray. Sounding an alarm on some impending doom, and most of it has to deal with China. I'm going to lay on top of that conversation what we just experienced this past Saturday with the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. And I'm going to just hand it over to you right now so you can help us understand what is the message you believe our enemies abroad. And when I'm thinking about our enemies, just following some of your own writing, I'm thinking China, I'm thinking Russia, I'm thinking Iran, and everything in between. What is the message they heard with the attempted assassination of Donald Trump?
Well, certainly the Chinese talked about how the United States, our political system, has become so polarized, has become dangerous and violent. This is part of China's narrative. Regardless of what happens in the U.S., they always criticize our democracy. Right. They do it on good days and on bad days. And certainly on Saturday, they doubled down on that message. Since that time, Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, has expressed his sympathy to President Trump. But that really was an afterthought on the part of the Chinese.
Say that last part again.
Xi Jinping expressed his sympathy to President Trump, but that really was an afterthought. It came after so much malicious propaganda from China about the failings of American democracy.
Yeah. But when we look at what happened, now, if I'm reading your articles and your tweets, as well as my own thoughts of great despair about what is happening to America on the world stage. When I'm looking at Iran, they're like a cancer that is spreading all throughout, right? They're from Iran to Palestine to Lebanon, now down in Yemen. I read an article a couple of days ago. Now they're over in not Eritrea, but the one right below them. The Ethiopia, I can't even remember, but I think it's Ethiopia now that they're that Iran. So you see the aggression of even countries like Iran. We know the aggression of Russia and China. What do you believe has changed given what we saw on Saturday? What do you believe have changed in their calculus about their assessment of our country, whether it's weak, whether they want to move another needle? What do you think changed?
I think that they have started to look at, and they look at America's election and electoral process more closely than we do because they depend upon it. And I'm getting the sense that they believe that it is more and more certain that President Trump will be elected on November 5. And that's not something that they want. But you can see the Republican Party energized, coming together around President Trump. And you can see, I think, the Democrats starting to express a sense of resignation. Now, Biden was very, very good to, you talked about Iran, was very good to Iran. He continued the Obama era policies of supporting the regime. And of course, in Tehran, they loved that. And they didn't like it, though, when Trump was in the Oval Office, because, for instance, he was able to find and kill Soleimani, a major figure in the regime, in the IRGC, the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
Right.
So really what we're talking about here is I think countries are starting to understand that Trump will be president in January 2025. And most countries are looking forward to that with anticipation. Probably Western Europe is not, because they don't like Trump. But I think most of the rest of the world believes this is good for America, for Trump to again be president.
I think our friends certainly believe that. But what do you think is in the mind of China, Russia, Iran, the day after November 5th, if Donald Trump should win? Like, how do they begin? What we see today is lack of regard for our borders, for our standing. We see China and Russia creating a new world order where China will lead that world order. What happens the day after November 5th if Donald Trump wins?
I think the Chinese normally try to test an American president in the first time in office, and they've traditionally done something belligerent, and they very well may do that again. This time, though, I think they're wary of President Trump. And we got to go back to April 2017 when you had Xi Jinping at Mar-a-Lago over that beautiful chocolate cake, as President Trump said. Trump stood up and said that he had ordered missile strikes on Syria, which is a Chinese friend. And Xi Jinping was just dead silent. And I think that really set the tone for the 4 years, which is the reason that the Chinese were reasonably well behaved, or relatively well behaved, during the Trump presidency. I think that they will try to bargain with Trump, see if they can come to some terms with him. But, Trump on the campaign trail has made it very clear what he's going to do. He's going to increase tariffs. He's going to withdraw permanent normal trade relations from China. These are things that are critically important for a China that is now even more dependent on external trade, exports. So this is going to be the time of great apprehension in the Chinese capital.
So why would China wait for the day after November 5th to make their move? Why? I mean, it certainly isn't advantageous. It's not advantageous for them if Donald Trump should win. They've moved a lot over the past 4 years with Biden being in office. So if they don't want to retract and go backwards, why would they wait to see what happens? If they believe what happened on this past Saturday with the attempted assassination of Donald Trump has only galvanized, or is galvanizing, the country to come together, why would they wait until the day after November 5th to see how this works? Why wouldn't they make a move sooner?
Yeah, there's one primary reason, and that is no wartime U.S. president has ever lost an election. So, that is one reason why, they may decide either do something or not do something. So I agree with you. Yeah, they could reelect Biden by doing something provocative.
So let me just repeat what you said. No wartime U.S. president has ever lost. So if we were trying to make predictions, you nor I have a crystal ball. I'm just thinking logically, because again, I'm reading some of your tweets. Here's one. You said China is driving the world to global conflict. Prepare for the worst moment in history and pray. This is obviously before this past Saturday. Another tweet, you said, we have to consider the possibility that no country can now deter Xi Jinping if he is in fact driven solely by domestic events, only God can save us now. And you have a number of tweets that are like this imminent prediction, this harbinger, a warning that something is going to take place and that China is going to move the needle. I feel it too. I really do. With everything that I've read and just watching. And if it is in China's best interest to have Biden in office, and if a part of their calculus is that what this assassination attempt on Donald Trump is actually galvanizing the country, why would they wait to see what happens, or versus triggering something now to get a different result than Donald Trump?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I think that they realized that they could have the decisive vote in this 2024 election, as they had a decisive vote in 2020. I mean, in 2020, just go back to show their mentality. They were very helpful to Joe Biden over Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primary.
How?
And a lot of propaganda and a lot of money going into the Biden campaign. And they did the same thing.
But a foreign government cannot contribute to a U.S. campaign.
Yeah, and neither may foreign nationals. But they did it anyway. What they did was they funneled a lot of small contributions through Act Blue, which is the Democratic Party website. And I'm sure that they use...
not directly to the candidate himself, but to a PAC that supports the cause of the Democrat Party.
Yes, and they did it through foreign sources. They did it through small donations, which are very difficult to trace. And so they were very successful. And of course, they were successful in disrupting President Trump's reelection campaign in 2020. So we saw all sorts of dirty tricks. They used TikTok for this purpose and other venues. So really what they did was an all-out campaign, and they were very successful. If you go back to February 2020, remember everyone was saying that President Trump was a shoo-in for reelection.
Yes.
But China had a vote, and so they changed it. Going forward to 2024, they could do a couple things. As I mentioned, no wartime U.S. president has ever lost re-election. So they could start a war. If they feel that they're not ready to do that, and that's a real possibility, they could try to do things to bolster U.S.-China relations, make it look more friendly, try to give the credit to Biden. Mm-hmm. So they could go either way on that. But, another thing we got to remember, and that is that I think that Xi Jinping, although, of course, he keeps an eye on the U.S. presidential election and other things, right now, I think that he is primarily driven by domestic incentives. And one could make an argument that he's driven almost solely by domestic incentives. And if that's the case, then he could do something between now and November 5. He may have no thinking at all about how it'll affect our presidential contest, but he may do it because he has to protect his own position in Beijing.
And so what's happening when you say if he's solely focused on domestic events? What are those domestic events that has him up in arms?
He has a deteriorating economy, and it is. They've
had that now for well over 4 years.
Yes, they had it during COVID, but everyone sort of gave the Chinese a pass, saying, "Oh, well, it was just COVID." But the problem for Xi Jinping right now is that the Chinese economy has not recovered post-COVID to the extent everybody thought. Mm-hmm. China right now, just on Monday, reported 4.7% growth for the second quarter of this year. That's a gross overstatement of how they did, but it's certainly less than the 5.3% that they claimed for the first quarter. Right. The Chinese people right now are not spending. They're not buying homes to a great extent. They are not going to the stores like they once did. They're just not optimistic. And that means the Chinese economy is probably, if it's growing at maybe 1%. But if it were growing at the 4.7% pace that they claim, it would not be growing fast enough to pay back the debt that they've accumulated, especially since 2008. So China has right now, it's hitting a wall. And Xi Jinping knows, because he has grabbed almost absolute power, that he has very few other people to blame, which means that he's got total or near total accountability, which means he's got a situation which he can't deal with, this eroding economy. Matter of fact, his proposals for dealing with the Chinese economy are making things worse. So he
And
needs to
so
do
and
something.
and so your thinking is that if he triggers a war or anything, that it could be less about what's going on in America and his power grab for world domination, but more so because he's wanting to distract the people, the Chinese people.
One other thing, I wouldn't say it's so much trying to distract the Chinese people. I think what he's trying to do is make it virtually impossible for senior figures in Beijing to depose him.
Hmm.
Remember, the Chinese people are oppressed. And right now, I don't think that a war would be popular among Chinese people, especially a war against
So he
Taiwan.
has no consideration for his own people, which of course aligns with his ruling um, to date. So he's really just focused on what his senior cabinet, what their mindset is, and how to keep them busy on anything other than his seat of power.
Yeah, absolutely. It's elite politics, and he wants to make sure that the people who are closest to him, highest up in the Communist Party, can't move against him.
And so what are some of the events that would cause his senior cabinet to not focus on him, but to focus on other things? Are we thinking about him starting a war in Taiwan?
I, Starting a war is certainly up on the menu. I don't think against Taiwan, because Taiwan is too hard a target, and I don't think he's really confident about it. For China to attack Taiwan, Xi Jinping would have to give some general officer, some admiral, some general, almost complete control over the Chinese military, making that figure the most powerful person in China. And I don't think Xi Jinping is at this point prepared to do that. But we've seen some very belligerent activity against the Philippines, especially at Second Thomas Shoal on June 17th. And I think that he's looking for a quick and easy win, so as he can come back and say, that his policies are correct. And so, therefore, despite some warnings, actually a dozen warnings from President Biden and from his State Department that the U.S. is prepared to use force against China, China's continued these dangerous activities in the South China Sea. So this is a very dangerous situation where we may not be deterring the Chinese. And if that's the case, then we're just bystanders for what could be the beginning of a new conflict. Because if things don't go well for China in the Philippines, in the South China Sea, then it could spread to Taiwan, Japan, India, God knows where
Yeah.
else. And that
Yeah.
means we're basically in World War III.
Well, do you think we're already in World War III? I kind of get the sense that we may be in the beginnings of World War III, but we just don't know it yet.
Yeah, China, yes. China is fighting proxy wars on three continents right now: in Europe, in Ukraine, in Asia, in the Middle East, Israel, and in North Africa, both above and south of the Sahara. China is engaging and fueling insurgencies that look like wars. So you got to go back to the 1930s when there were separate wars around the world, but they merged into what we now call World War II.
Right.
And so, therefore, we got to be worried that the same dynamic exists today, that the conflicts that are existing right now could merge into World War III. And
And
that
what you
certainly
just
would happen.
described, and what you previously described about China triggering something with, let's say, the Philippines certainly sounds like that could be the umbrella that brings all of these individual wars into one collective one.
Right. We've got to remember that with all these separate conflicts, you have a lot of people say, well, oh, that's just Ukraine. It doesn't really affect us.
Right.
Well, that's wrong. And the reason is that because Russia and China are behind all these conflicts, every war, every insurgency, every conflict has global implications. And so we got to understand that,
Right.
unless things quiet down, yeah, we are in the foothills of World War III.
Do you see things calming down?
Great question. I tend not to. I will be a little bit of an optimist and hope that the Chinese and the Russians look at the U.S. political situation, believe that Donald Trump will be elected, and therefore decide that it's better not to do anything, even in anticipation of that election.
Yeah.
That is, I think, our really only hope. Because under Biden, what we have seen after the catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan in
Right. It's an
2021, we've
emboldening.
seen the world fall apart.
Yes, I know. A couple more questions. I'm going to go back to your tweet because I find them to be interesting. One, because they mirror a lot of what I'm thinking and this sense of impending doom. And I don't want to feel that way. I want to be happy, right? And yet I'm watching thousands of military age Chinese men walk right across our border. I'm watching China owns, or Chinese individuals own, over 200,000 acres of farmland. And when you lay that on top of where our military bases are, they seem to be very strategically located. We're watching, the the increase of agitation, whether it's with the Houthis, whether it's with China. It's just, I feel this sense of impending doom, and yet everyone is acting like it's just another Monday. Like there's nothing to see here, even after the assassination attempt on President Trump. One, I have to say, I am so proud of those who lean more towards my side of the aisle in the way that we have responded, not in kind of with the aggression that we saw on Saturday, but one, instead, I'm seeing people very hopeful, very, very tense, but very hopeful, trying to move forward to November, very focused. And so I want to say I'm very proud of them from that perspective. And yet at the same time, I see a lot of people behaving like it's just another, it's just another Monday. Nothing much has happened. And so when I read your tweet that says, for example, we have to consider the possibility that no country can now deter Xi Jinping if he is in fact driven solely by domestic events. Only God can save us now. You often admonish people to turn to God in prayer when you put out these tweets. Is that the best strategy we have right now under the Biden administration? Because they are in charge until next year. So between
Yeah,
now and next year, is that the best is that the best strategy we have, is to turn to God?
well, it's something we absolutely have to do, whether good times or bad. And I'm worried about America that seems to have lost its way,
Yeah.
that is not, that has become in many ways government-sponsored immorality. And, I don't care what people, consenting adults do at home by themselves, but, this whole focus on sexualizing children
Yeah.
is,
It's just evil.
just unspeakable.
Yes.
So this is government-sponsored immorality. And so that's why I focus on morality and prayer and religion and faith, because we have to find our way again.
I do believe that. I ran in a very competitive race here in the state of Pennsylvania back in 2022 against Dr. Oz. I worked as the National Grassroots Director for the Vivek Ramaswamy presidential campaign. I have my podcast that is growing. I absolutely believe there is work for us to do. That's not just on our knees in prayer. And yet, after all that I've done, I too feel as though perhaps we should have always led with prayer and turning to God, because I believe what happened to that attempted assassination of Donald Trump, that too was the providence of God. I believe that was God showing our country tremendous grace to not give us what we deserve. And by what we deserve, when you see a nation that is actively applauding the mutilation of little boys and girls' bodies, lying to them that they can be something other than their DNA, I find that to be so evil. And yet God has given us grace. And that Donald Trump, by the providence of God, did not succumb to those injuries. And it was not worse than it already is. And yet I believe firmly that a big key to us winning in November, getting better people in the right places, is for this nation to turn their hearts back to God.
Yes, the Bible has so many instances of societies that have turned their back on God, and we must not do that. So it is the faith that will keep us going. It is the faith that will save us. And we ask for God's grace. So that's why I focus on prayer.
What else in closing, what should we know that that we don't know that we should be mindful of?
Yeah, I wish I had, I don't have a security clearance. All I do is I just read what everybody else reads.
You're reading the tea leaves. And what are the tea leaves telling you?
That this is the most consequential time in history. It is extremely dangerous. We have it's China is not nearly as strong as the United States. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, even together, they're not as strong as the United States. Problem, though, is that we don't have a president who recognizes the danger and is defending us. And so we could lose our country. And so it is up to us to make sure that we get through this very difficult period. Our Constitution gives to one figure the making and implementation of foreign policy, and that's the president. So there's limited to what we can do, but we have political pressure, and political pressure has forced Biden to do things that he hasn't wanted to do in the past. So let's make sure that we use that pressure. And this is a time of great vulnerability for Biden. So maybe we can get through this and hope that on January 20, 2025, that it is President Trump taking the oath of office.
Yes. In the name of Jesus. Gordan, thank you so much for taking time out for and coming and talking with us about these very important times. I too believe this is a very consequential moment that we're all living in. Thank you so much for coming and talking with me.
Well, thank you, Kathy. I really appreciate it.
Yes, stay right there. Don't move. To everyone else, thank you so much for listening. Please, you know the drill. Share, like, subscribe, hit the notification button, and take care of one another. Bye-bye.